Picture this: a towering temple wall, its surface etched with intricate carvings that have stood for centuries. The stone is weathered, but the stories it holds are far from faded. In fact, they pulse with life, whispering not one but two competing versions of history. How is it possible for a single structure to preserve rival narratives, each vying for dominance across time? This isn't just a relic of the past, it's a puzzle, a contradiction carved in stone, and it challenges everything we think we know about how history is written. This temple, nestled in a region where empires once clashed and cultures intertwined, isn't just a monument, it's a battleground of memory. On one side, you might see a king's triumph celebrated in vivid detail. On another, the same event retold with a subtle but seismic shift in perspective. The carvings don't just depict history, they rewrite it layer by layer, depending on who held power, who told the story, and who needed their version to endure. And here's the astonishing part: both accounts coexist side by side on the same wall. It's as if the stone itself refused to choose, preserving a dialogue of dissonance that echoes through the ages. So why does this matter? Because history isn't just a record of what happened. It's a tapestry woven by the hands of those who survived to tell it. This temple wall is a rare artifact that refuses to let us forget that truth. It forces us to ask, who gets to decide what's remembered? How do rival stories find a way to share the same space? And what can they teach us about the messy, complicated nature of the past? Over the course of this video, we'll unravel how these dual histories came to be, why they were carved in stone instead of erased, and what they reveal about the power of memory itself. This isn't just a story about ancient carvings, it's about how history is never as simple as it seems, and how even stone can hold secrets that refuse to stay silent. The discovery came on an unremarkable morning, the sun barely cresting over the dig site as brushes swept away centuries of dust. At first, the archaeologists assumed it was just another section of ornate temple carvings until the first contradictions emerged. One team member traced a finger along a triumphant procession of soldiers, their spears raised high in victory, only to notice another scene directly above it where those same soldiers knelt in submission. The air went still. This wasn't just wear and tear or later additions, it was intentional. Two histories carved with equal care, locked in a silent standoff on the same wall. The preservation was nothing short of miraculous. Most ancient sites bear the scars of conquest, their original narratives chiseled away by new rulers eager to rewrite the past. But here, the stone had shielded both versions. Faded but legible, the carvings showed no signs of defacement, no hammer strikes, no purposeful erasures. It was as if the wall itself had refused to take sides. Researchers whispered theories. Was this a compromise between rival factions, a clever scribe's act of defiance? Or something far more deliberate, a record meant to outlast kings and empires, ensuring no single story could claim ultimate authority? What makes this wall extraordinary isn't just its survival, but its stubborn duality. In an age where history was often written by the victors, here was proof that sometimes the vanquished got to keep their voice too. The carvings don't just clash, they converse. A king's boastful conquest inscription might loom large, but right beside it, tucked into the margins, a smaller scene shows villagers rebuilding what his army burned. These weren't accidental overlaps, they were choices. Someone, centuries ago, decided both stories were worth etching into eternity. So why preserve rival truths instead of destroying them? And what does that tell us about the people who left this puzzle behind? To understand the stories locked in this stone, we need to step back into the world of the two rival powers who left their mark here. On one side stood the Lakshmi dynasty, a rising force known for their sprawling trade networks and devotion to the goddess of prosperity. Their carvings show grand processions, merchants weighed down with spices and silks, and priests conducting elaborate rituals, a vision of stability and divine favor. But just inches away, the rival Varuna kingdom tells a different tale. Their artisans carved scenes of rebellion, Lakshmi temples crumbling, their merchants fleeing with empty carts, and the Varuna's warrior queen leading chariots through the smoke of conquest. Historians point to a single year, 1182, as the flashpoint. The Lakshmi records describe it as a time of unparalleled peace, their king signing treaties under celestial omens. The Varuna carvings, meanwhile, show that same year as a bloody uprising, with inscriptions boasting how their forces shattered the golden chains of Lakshmi rule. Even the dating systems clash. One uses lunar cycles, the other solar, making it seem like they existed in separate worlds, though they shared the same land. What's fascinating isn't just their opposing claims, but how they chose to immortalize them. The Lakshmi artisans worked in precise geometric patterns, their figures serene and idealized. The Varuna style was raw and dynamic, all swirling motion and exaggerated expressions. You can almost hear the cultural tension in the stone itself, one side valuing order and harmony, the other celebrating chaos and change. Yet neither faction defaced the other's work. Why this unexpected tolerance? Some scholars suggest practical reasons. Perhaps a later ruler, inheriting both territories, saw value in appeasing both populations. Others argue it was something deeper. A weathered inscription hidden near the base of the wall offers a clue. Truth has many faces, but stone remembers all. Maybe, just maybe, those who came later recognized that history isn't about erasing rivals, but about letting their voices linger so future generations could weigh them side by side. Perhaps the most compelling explanation for this temple wall's duality isn't conflict but careful negotiation. Imagine two rival kingdoms, exhausted by decades of war, neither strong enough to obliterate the other, yet both desperate to claim legitimacy. The wall might have been their solution, a diplomatic chess move carved in stone. Across the ancient world, we've seen this before, monuments that became neutral ground. In Egypt's Temple of Ka-Ombo, twin sanctuaries honor both the crocodile god Sobek and the falcon-headed Horus, a concession to neighboring regions with clashing beliefs. Even the Roman Arch of Septimius Severus in Libya displays alternating inscriptions, one for the emperor's supporters, another for his rivals, each claiming victory in the same civil war. Look closer at this temple's carvings, and you'll spot the subtle language of compromise. A Lakshmi priest extends a hand toward a Varuna warrior, not in battle, but holding a ceremonial platter as if offering tribute. The Varuna queen's chariot faces the Lakshmi king's procession, yet neither scene shows actual combat. Instead, they're framed by identical lotus motifs, a symbol of shared spirituality. These aren't accidental details, they're visual treaties designed to let both sides save face. The Lakshmi could point to their grand temples and say, "See. Our faith endured." The Varuna could gesture to their scenes of rebellion and declare, "We broke their power." Truth became flexible, molded by necessity. But make no mistake, this wasn't equality. Power still whispered through every chisel stroke. The Lakshmi carvings dominate the eye level, their inscriptions crisper, their figures larger. The Varuna's counter-narratives often cluster near the edges or overhead, forcing viewers to look up or kneel to see them fully. Even in compromise, hierarchy lingered. Yet the sheer act of preserving both voices suggests something radical for its time, an acknowledgement that history isn't absolute. Maybe the artisans themselves knew they were crafting a paradox. Hidden in a corner, one faint carving shows two scribes back to back, their styluses pointing in opposite directions, a silent joke about the absurdity of singular truths. The technical mastery behind this duality is staggering. Unlike palimpsests where new text overwrites the old, these carvers worked with surgical precision, leaving earlier scenes intact while weaving in counterpoints. They used perspective tricks, tilting figures or altering depths, to make overlapping narratives legible from different angles. Some sections even play with light. At noon, the Lakshmi scenes shine brightest, but at dawn, elongated shadows bring the Varuna's rebellions into sharp relief. This wasn't just artistry, it was engineering, a deliberate choreography of perception. The wall didn't just record history, it performed it, changing its story depending on where you stood or when you looked. What emerges isn't a chaotic jumble, but a calculated balance. The rulers who commissioned this knew their legacy would outlive them, and they gambled that future generations would prefer messy truth over tidy lies. In that sense, the wall isn't just a relic, it's a challenge. It asks us to sit with discomfort, to hold competing truths in our hands, and resist the urge to simplify. After all, if ancient carvers could etch dissonance into stone, surely we can learn to read it. The artisans who crafted this temple wall weren't just storytellers, they were illusionists, masters of visual sleight of hand. To weave two rival histories into a single surface, they employed techniques so ingenious they'd make a modern filmmaker jealous. Take the layout. Rather than carving the Lakshmi and Varuna narratives side by side in obvious columns, they intertwined them like vines. A Lakshmi priest's outstretched arm might morph into a Varuna warrior's spear shaft. A ceremonial offering bowl could double as a shield when viewed from a different angle. This wasn't chaos, it was calculated. By forcing viewers to physically shift perspective to follow each story, the wall made choosing between them an active, almost participatory act. Color played a stealthy role too. Though centuries have faded the pigments, residue analysis reveals the Lakshmi scenes were originally bathed in warm golds and reds, colors of wealth and divinity in their culture. The Varuna sections, meanwhile, used cooler blues and greens, evoking their warrior ethos of forests and rivers. Even the stone itself was manipulated. The Lakshmi artisans worked with the rock's natural grain to create smooth, flowing lines, while the Varuna carvers deliberately crossed the grain, leaving rougher textures that caught the light differently. These weren't aesthetic choices, they were visual propaganda, each side using materials to subliminally reinforce their worldview. But the true genius lies in the hieroglyphs. At first glance, the inscriptions seem neutral, but subtle tweaks betray bias. A Lakshmi scribe might use the verb to bestow when describing their king's actions, while the Varuna version of the same event uses to seize. The same mountain pass could be labeled Path of the Sun in one inscription and Vulture's Gorge in another, transforming a trade route into either a divine highway or a treacherous kill box. These linguistic sleights of hand mirror modern, unreliable narrators. Think of the contradictory witness accounts in films like Rashomon or the shifting perspectives in Gone Girl. The wall proves this technique isn't new. It's ancient human nature to bend truth through selective framing. For ordinary people standing before this wall centuries ago, the experience must have been dizzying. A farmer loyal to the Lakshmi dynasty would follow their king's triumphant procession, his eye guided by the gilded path of carvings at chest height. But a Varuna sympathizer, perhaps shorter or standing farther back, might naturally tilt their gaze upward to where the rebellion scenes unfolded near the ceiling. The wall didn't just show two histories, it engineered how they'd be seen, using height, light, and even the viewer's own body to favor one narrative over another without ever erasing its rival. Imagine the whispers in the crowd. Did you see how the Queen's chariot points toward the sunrise? No, look again from here, it's clearly fleeing the sunset. The stone became a mirror, reflecting back what each culture needed to believe. This duality resonates today more than ever. In an age of algorithmically tailored news feeds and deepfake media, we're surrounded by modern versions of this temple wall platforms that show us competing realities without reconciliation. The ancients may have lacked our technology, but their understanding of perception's power was just as sophisticated. Their solution wasn't to destroy opposing views, but to let them coexist in uneasy tension, forcing viewers to grapple with the discomfort of multiple truths. Perhaps that's the wall's most enduring lesson. History isn't found in any single narrative, but in the silent spaces between them, where contradictions spark the hardest questions. For the everyday pilgrim approaching this temple wall, the experience was less about untangling contradictions and more about absorbing its overwhelming presence. Imagine a merchant from a distant city, knees dusty from travel, squinting up at the carvings as the midday sun threw competing scenes into sharp relief. Would they even notice the dissonance? To many, this wasn't a puzzle to solve, it was a spectacle, a divine tapestry too immense to question. Folk tales from the region hint at how ordinary people made sense of it. One popular legend described the wall as the god's loom, weaving together the threads of human strife into a single, sacred pattern. Another claimed the carvings changed at night, revealing hidden truths to those pure of heart. These stories didn't resolve the contradictions, they sanctified them. Elite scholars, however, saw the wall through a sharper lens. Scrolls from a nearby monastery preserved debates between Lakshmi and Varuna scribes, each accusing the other of stealing shadow, a poetic phrase for distorting history. One particularly fiery commentary complains that the Varuna carvers made our king's generosity look like weakness by twisting his open hand into a gesture of surrender. Yet even these critics rarely demanded the rival carvings be destroyed. There was an unspoken understanding that the wall's power came from its duality, like a flame that needs both heat and oxygen to burn. The wall's genius lay in how it catered to different levels of literacy. For the illiterate majority, the visuals told self-contained stories. A farmer might see only the Lakshmi's bountiful harvest scenes, while a soldier focused on the Varuna's battle formations. But for those who could read the inscriptions, the contradictions became unavoidable. A surviving trader's diary describes his confusion upon realizing the same event was labeled the gift of peace in one script and the year of broken chains just inches below. His solution, he rubbed charcoal on both passages, creating a makeshift rubbing to show his village elders, trusting them to decide which version to believe. This interplay between elite and Chinese letter interpretations shaped collective memory in surprising ways. Annual festivals grew up around the wall, with Lakshmi devotees processing along its base, while Varuna loyalists climbed scaffolding to enact their counter-narratives overhead. Over time, the competing rituals merged children's rhymes from the era describe the tall story and the wide story, acknowledging both perspectives without reconciling them. Even today, local proverbs echo this tolerance for ambiguity. Truth wears two sandals, or stone remembers, but the wind carries all voices. What emerged wasn't a single historical record, but a living dialogue. The wall didn't just preserve memory, it performed it, inviting each generation to wrestle with its contradictions anew. In that sense, it functioned like ancient social media, a platform where rival narratives coexisted, where likes and shares took the form of ritual reenactments and folk adaptations. The key difference, unlike our fleeting digital feeds, these stories were carved to outlast empires, a reminder that collective memory isn't about consensus, it's about learning to hold multiple truths at once. Even for seasoned archaeologists, this temple wall presented a labyrinth of contradictions. Early excavators assumed the Lakshmi carvings came first, their smoother lines and deeper grooves suggesting an older hand. But when carbon dating of pigment residues placed some Varuna inscriptions earlier, the entire timeline unraveled. Teams spent months debating whether one culture had partially erased the other's work, until microscopic analysis revealed something astonishing. The chisel marks showed no signs of overwriting. Instead, artisans from both dynasties had carved simultaneously, working around existing scenes with millimeter precision. A Lakshmi sun symbol might curve to avoid a Varuna battle standard, while a Varuna warrior's shield would taper to accommodate a Lakshmi priest's outstretched arm. This wasn't destruction, it was delicate negotiation in stone. Dating the layers became its own puzzle. Traditional stratigraphy failed here. The wall wasn't built in neat chronological layers, but in competing narratives that snaked across its surface. Researchers turned to lichenometry, measuring the growth of ancient lichens on carved surfaces, and optically stimulated luminescence to determine when quartz crystals in the stone were last exposed to sunlight. The results painted a chaotic portrait. Lakshmi and Varuna artisans had returned to the wall repeatedly over 3 generations, adding scenes in bursts of activity that mirrored periods of tense truce or covert rivalry. One section dated to 1195 showed Lakshmi figures carved over earlier Varuna graffiti, not as destruction, but as a reply, their poses mirroring the defeated warriors below but with subtle reversals. A slumped Varuna soldier might have a Lakshmi official bowing deeply above him, transforming surrender into respect. Early misinterpretations abounded. 19th century colonial archaeologists, convinced of linear progress, labeled the wall a palimpsest of conquest and pried loose sections searching for a pure, original layer beneath. They missed the point entirely. Later scholars fell into the opposite trap, romanticizing the duality as some ancient form of pluralism. The truth, as often, lay in between. Recent laser scans revealed intentional obfuscations, not erasures, but visual distractions. A Varuna artisan might carve a swirling cloud pattern over a sensitive Lakshmi political message, not to destroy it but to draw the eye away. Similarly, Lakshmi artists used repetitive decorative borders like visual noise, allowing contentious scenes to fade into background static unless you knew where to look. Modern technology has peeled back these layers of misdirection. Multispectral imaging detects faded pigments invisible to the naked eye, showing how color was weaponized. Varuna blues painted over Lakshmi gold in strategic areas to shift emotional tone. Photogrammetry creates 3D models where lighting angles prove certain scenes were designed to be legible only at specific times of day. Most revealing is reflectance transformation imaging, which captures how light interacts with carved surfaces at microscopic levels. This exposed ghost carvings, places where artisans sketched preliminary designs for both narratives in faint scratches before committing to final versions, like a stone canvas preserving its own rough drafts. What emerges isn't a tidy resolution but a deeper appreciation for the wall's complexity. These weren't haphazard additions or passive preservation, they were active choices, a high-stakes game of visual diplomacy where every chisel stroke carried weight. The debates continue. Did later caretakers deliberately let lichen grow over particularly inflammatory scenes? were some contradictions added centuries later as commentary by rogue scribes. The stone keeps its secrets, but with each technological advance, we come closer to hearing both sides of this ancient whisper. The laser scanner's beam swept across the temple wall inch by inch, revealing what centuries of human eyes had missed. At first glance, the stone appeared uniformly weathered until the digital reconstruction flickered to life on the researchers' screens. There, glowing in eerie blue relief, were the ghosts of the walls past, faint outlines of carvings that had been carefully sanded away, their contours preserved like shadows in the rock. One scene showed a Lakshmi king kneeling an unthinkable posture in the official narrative, while another depicted Varuna soldiers tossing not weapons, but sacks of grain into a crowd. These weren't mistakes or later additions. They were deliberate erasures, evidence of stories someone had tried to bury. The technology behind this revelation is as fascinating as the finds themselves. Structured light scanners project thousands of microscopic patterns onto the surface, measuring distortions to create 3D maps accurate to a fraction of a millimeter. When paired with reflectance transformation imaging, which captures how light scatters across tool marks invisible to the naked eye, the wall began confessing secrets it had held for 800 years. A section near the base, long thought to be decorative filler, resolved into a stunning confession. A scribe's trial run for reconciling both narratives, with Lakshmi and Varuna symbols merged into hybrid designs. Elsewhere, ultraviolet fluorescence exposed patches where acidic solutions had been applied to soften stone for recarving, their chemical fingerprints still detectable after centuries. Most haunting were the echoglyphs, carvings made with such subtle pressure that they left no visible trace, yet the scanner detected compressed crystal structures in the quartz. One such ghost text, hidden beneath a Varuna victory proclamation, read, "The king's mercy outshone his sword. The same hand that chiseled those words later gouged them out, but the stone remembered." These discoveries rewrite the wall's biography. What we once saw as a static monument was actually a living document, edited and revised across generations like a historical manuscript with its drafts and marginalia still intact. Yet with every revelation comes uncomfortable questions. Should we digitally restore erased scenes that their own creators wanted forgotten? Does exposing counter-narratives disrespect ancient intentions or honor history's complexity? When laser scans revealed a defaced Lakshmi goddess with a Varuna warrior's face crudely superimposed, local religious leaders protested its publication, arguing some truths are meant to stay buried. Archaeologists countered that selective preservation risks repeating the very censorship they study. The wall's greatest lesson might be this: technology doesn't just uncover history, it forces us to confront who gets to decide what endures. The temple wall's ancient contradictions have spilled into the modern world, igniting fierce debates over who truly owns its stories. Descendant communities of the Lakshmi and Varuna dynasties still live in the region, and for many, these carvings aren't just history, they're identity. In 2018, tensions flared when a Lakshmi heritage group petitioned UNESCO to recognize the wall as a sacred site of their ancestors, demanding conservation efforts focus solely on their narrative. Varuna activists countered with protests, unfurling banners that read, "Stone remembers our resistance." The standoff forced UNESCO into a delicate balancing act. How do you preserve a monument that's essentially two monuments in one? Their compromise, declaring the wall a multivocal heritage site, was groundbreaking, but it satisfied no one. Conservation teams now face an impossible task: cleaning centuries of grime without accidentally privileging one set of carvings over another. Even the choice of lighting angles in the protective canopy became politicized, with each community accusing curators of hiding their history in shadow. Legal battles have only deepened the rift. In 2021, a Lakshmi organization sued to block a Varuna-sponsored augmented reality app that overlaid animated rebel scenes onto the physical wall, calling it digital vandalism. The court's surprising ruling: the app could proceed, but only if it included a toggle letting users switch between both narratives. This precedent rippled through museum circles, challenging how institutions display contested artifacts. Take the British Museum's controversial Dialogues in Stone exhibit, which tried recreating sections of the wall alongside touchscreens, offering rival interpretations. Critics accused it of reducing centuries of conflict to a choose-your-own-adventure gimmick, while supporters praised it as the only honest approach. Even the act of labeling proves fraught. Call it a conquest or a liberation, and you've already taken sides. Beyond legalities, the wall forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about cultural stewardship. When archaeologists from Europe first documented the site in the 1800s, they dismissed local oral traditions about the carving's meanings, trusting only their own interpretations. Today, descendant scholars are reclaiming that authority, but new power imbalances emerge. A Varuna elder's insistence that certain scenes depict spiritual visions, not historical events, clashes with Western academia's demand for empirical proof. Meanwhile, tourism marketing commodifies the duality, selling the wall as a mystery rather than a living testament to unresolved trauma. Parallels abound worldwide. In Spain's Alhambra, Islamic calligraphy and Christian frescoes coexist on the same arches, not as harmony, but as layers of conquest. Mexico's Templo Mayor preserves Aztec and Spanish colonial structures side by side, refusing to erase either. What makes this temple wall unique is its refusal to stratify. Its rival narratives don't layer chronologically but intertwine like wrestling serpents. Perhaps that's why it unsettles us. In an era of polarized narratives, it offers no clean resolution, only the insistence that truth, like stone, is textured and unyielding. The wall's greatest provocation isn't its contradictions, but its quiet challenge. Can we learn to stand in the space between stories without demanding one must fall? The temple wall's struggle between competing narratives isn't an isolated phenomenon. It's part of a global tapestry where stone becomes the battleground for memory. Take Istanbul's Hagia Sophia, a monument that has been a cathedral, a mosque, and now a museum, its walls echoing with layered chants of priests and muezzins. Just like our temple, its mosaics of Christian saints coexist with Islamic calligraphy, not as harmony but as uneasy roommates. Yet there's a key difference. Hagia Sophia's layers are chronological, each era literally built over the last. Our temple wall refuses that linear hierarchy, forcing both histories to occupy the same plane, neither dominant nor erased. Jerusalem's Temple Mount, or Haram al-Sharif, depending on who you ask, presents another striking parallel. For Jews, it's the site of Solomon's temple. For Muslims, the dome of the rock's sacred footprint. Unlike the temple wall's intentional duality, this space is fiercely partitioned, with access and archaeology politicized down to the centimeter. Where our carvers etched rival stories into dialogue, here the narratives are siloed, separated by checkpoints and centuries of mistrust. Yet both sites share a raw power. They force us to confront how sacred ground becomes contested ground, and who gets to inscribe their truth into eternity. Even in Cambodia's Angkor Wat, we see this tension play out. Originally a Hindu temple, its carvings were subtly altered when it became a Buddhist site, not by destroying the old gods, but by reframing them. A Vishnu statue might be reinterpreted as a Buddha in meditation, much like how our Lakshmi artisans repurposed Varuna battle scenes into gestures of diplomacy. But again, the temple wall stands apart. At anchor, the overlay is sequential, one faith giving way to another. Our wall holds both narratives in suspended animation, refusing to let either have the final word. What makes this temple unique isn't just its preservation of duality, but its refusal to resolve it. Most contested monuments eventually fossilize into a single dominant story. Think of Rome's Colosseum, where Christian crosses now overshadow its pagan past. Our wall never allowed that simplification. Perhaps that's why it feels so unsettlingly modern. In an age of algorithmically curated truths, where social media feeds serve us competing realities in parallel bubbles, the wall mirrors our own fractured moment. It's a reminder that history has always been a chorus of voices, not a solo performance, and that the loudest voice isn't necessarily the truest. Yet for all its parallels, the temple wall's real power lies in its quiet subversion. Where other monuments shout one narrative over another, this one whispers too. Its genius is in the negative space, the gaps where the carvings almost touch but don't, leaving room for doubt, for questioning, for you to decide. That's why it endures, not as a relic of some ancient pluralist utopia, but as a challenge carved in stone. Can we hold space for stories that don't agree? Can we resist the urge to sand away the contradictions and call it unity? 800 years later, the wall still waits for our answer. History isn't a single thread, it's a tangled knot of voices, each pulling in different directions. What makes this temple wall extraordinary isn't just its age or artistry, but how it lays bare this fundamental truth. While most historical records bury contradictions under layers of time, this wall refuses to let them fade. It's a palimpsest in stone where every erasure and addition remains visible, whispering that the past was never as simple as the victors claimed. The philosopher Walter Benjamin once wrote that history is filled with the presence of the now, shaped by who does the remembering. The Lakshmi and Varuna carvings prove his point. Two versions of events, equally vivid, neither willing to surrender. Think about how we encounter history today. Textbooks smooth over contradictions, museums display curated narratives, and monuments often shout a single perspective. This wall does the opposite. It invites us to stand in the space between truths, to feel the weight of competing memories pressing against each other. The French historian Pierre Nora called these contested spaces lieux de mémoire, realms where memory crystallizes and clashes. Here, the stone itself becomes such a realm, not by resolving the tension, but by holding it. That's what makes the wall so unsettlingly modern. In an era of algorithmically tailored news and social media echo chambers, we're surrounded by versions of this same struggle. One platform's peacekeeping operation is another's illegal invasion. A protest can be framed as chaos or revolution, depending on who holds the camera. The wall teaches us that this isn't a new phenomenon, it's human nature to shape narratives to our needs. The difference: today's digital carvings vanish with a swipe, while these stone stories endure, forcing us to confront their dissonance head-on. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche argued that all history is perspectival, writing, "There are no facts, only interpretations." The wall embodies this idea physically. A Lakshmi merchant's generous trade mission is a Varuna plundering expedition just inches away. Neither is false, they are filtered through different worldviews, priorities, and fears. This doesn't mean truth is impossible, but that it's multifaceted. Like light refracting through a prism, history splits into spectra depending on where you stand. So what does this mean for us? The wall's real lesson isn't about ancient kings or forgotten wars, it's about humility. It asks us to question whose voices are amplified and whose are sanded into the margins. When we read a headline or watch a documentary, are we seeing the whole picture or just the version carved at eye level? The stone reminds us that behind every dominant narrative, there's often a counterstory waiting to be noticed if we're willing to look closely enough. Perhaps that's why the artisans left both histories intact, not because they lacked the power to destroy one, but because they understood something profound. Memory is strongest when it's challenged. A single, unchallenged story grows brittle over time, while contradictions keep it alive. In that sense, the wall isn't just a record of the past, it's a mirror for our present, reflecting how we choose to remember and what we risk when we stop listening to the other side. The carvings on this temple wall might be centuries old, but their tactics feel unnervingly familiar. Look closely, and you'll spot the same visual manipulation techniques that flood today's media landscapes. The Lakshmi artisans didn't just depict their king, they framed him against a rising sun, his hands lifted not in command, but in benediction, transforming conquest into divine will. Meanwhile, the Varuna carvers used forced perspective to make Lakshmi soldiers appear smaller, their weapons diminished beside towering rebel figures. Sound like something you've scrolled past recently? Modern propaganda may have traded chisels for Photoshop, but the playbook hasn't changed. Both eras weaponize scale, symbolism, and selective framing to shape what we believe. Consider how ancient and modern creators exploit cognitive biases. The Lakshmi's repetitive border patterns, identical lotus flowers marching in perfect rows, weren't just decoration. Psychologists now recognize this technique as illusory truth, where repeated exposure makes messages feel factual. It's the same principle behind today's viral misinformation loops. And those Varuna battle scenes crammed with chaotic motion, they trigger the same visceral response as shaky smartphone footage of protests, emotion overriding analysis. Even the wall's dual narratives mirror our algorithmically fractured digital spaces, where opposing camps see entirely different versions of events without ever confronting the contradiction. Yet there's a crucial difference. Today's misinformation vanishes with a refresh, but these stone lies were carved to outlast their creators. That permanence forced a strange accountability. When Lakshmi scribes exaggerated their king's generosity, they knew Varuna observers would etch corrections inches away. This tension created a self-correcting mechanism, an ancient fact-checking system in rock. Compare that to our ephemeral digital battlegrounds where false claims spread faster than corrections. The wall's enduring medium turned propaganda into a dialogue, not a monologue. Perhaps that's its unexpected gift. In an age of deepfakes and AI-generated disinformation, the wall reminds us that bias isn't new, but neither is resistance. Just as ancient pilgrims could walk the wall's length to compare narratives, we too can seek out the cracks where light gets in. The Lakshmi and Varuna artisans, for all their rivalry, shared one profound understanding. When you carve lies in stone, you'd better leave room for truth to answer back. 8 centuries later, their silent standoff whispers a warning and an invitation to all who shape stories today. Walk through the temple complex today, and you'll find the wall's contradictions polished into something more palatable, a tourist attraction where history is repackaged as entertainment. Brochures advertise it as a mystery of the ancients, with guided tours offering 2 versions of the same facts, one script for Lakshmi heritage groups, another for Varuna descendants, each delivered with equal conviction. The gift shop tells its own story, keychains stamped with simplified carvings where the Lakshmi king's benevolent smile is exaggerated, while Varuna rebellion scenes shrink into decorative borders. Even the lighting is curated. Spotlights illuminate the most dramatic conflicts for photo ops, leaving subtler counter-narratives in shadow. It's easier to sell a clash than a conversation. Social media amplifies this distortion. Instagram Reels zoom in on the most visually striking contradictions, usually the Lakshmi's golden processions or the Varuna's fiery battles, while cropping out the quieter moments where the two narratives intertwine. A viral TikTok trend last year had visitors posing as Team Lakshmi or Team Varuna, with mock-serious captions about choosing sides in history. The wall's nuance gets flattened into memes, its 8 centuries of careful tension reduced to a binary debate. Worse are the augmented reality filters that let users erase opposing carvings with a finger swipe, a gimmick that would have horrified the original artisans. Preservation teams face impossible choices. Cleaning the stone risks favoring one narrative lichen might protect a Varuna battle scene but obscure a Lakshmi peace treaty. Early attempts used neutral pH solutions until chemists realized the Varuna's blue pigments degraded faster than the Lakshmi's reds. Now, lasers calibrated to specific wavelengths target grime without touching pigment, a painstaking process that takes months per square meter. Even the scaffolding is political. When engineers proposed a walkway that would let visitors see the Varuna's ceiling carvings up close, Lakshmi traditionalists argued it elevated rebel voices literally. Yet amid the commodification, glimmers of the wall's true purpose endure. Some local guides, trained by descendant scholars, point out where a Lakshmi priest's robe blends into a Varuna warrior's banner, whispering, "Look closer." They left room for each other. A handful of souvenir stalls sell rubbings that capture both narratives in full, though they're less popular than the flashy keychains. And in quiet corners, you'll still find pilgrims from both communities leaving identical offerings, not to one side or the other, but in the narrow space between carvings where the stone remembers everything. The same forces that have preserved the temple wall for centuries, wind, rain, and the slow breath of time now threaten to erase it. Scientists monitoring the site have sounded alarms about accelerating erosion. Where once a millimeter of stone wore away every 50 years, climate change has tripled that rate in some sections. Rising humidity swells microscopic cracks, while acid rain, a modern curse the original builders never faced, eats at pigments that survived 800 summers. A recent thermal imaging study revealed something even more disturbing. The wall's internal temperature fluctuations, once stable, now swing wildly between day and night, stressing the stone like a glass repeatedly heated and cooled. The Lakshmi and Varuna artisans carved for eternity, but eternity isn't what it used to be. Conservators are racing against the clock with tools those ancient craftsmen couldn't have imagined. Laser scanners mounted on drones map every groove and fissure in 3 dimensions, creating a digital twin accurate to within 2 microns, the width of a bacterium. At night, when tourist footsteps fade, teams apply cellulose poultices to draw out salts from the stone, a process as delicate as dialysis for a living patient. The most fragile sections now wear stone stockings, custom-knit meshes of ultra-fine titanium thread that stabilize surfaces without trapping moisture. Yet even these high-tech fixes feel provisional. "We're not conserving the past anymore," one restorer admitted. "We're archiving a future loss." There's cruel irony in the wall's modern fragility. The same quartzite that defied ancient chisels now crumbles under the weight of our industrial age. Pollution particles cling like abrasive dust, turning every breeze into sandpaper. Meanwhile, the lichens that once protected certain pigments are dying from atmospheric nitrogen, their symbiotic relationship with the stone broken by chemistry the carvers never foresaw. Compare this to the builders' methods. They selected stone not just for beauty, but for its crystalline structure, orienting each block so its natural grain ran parallel to the carvings, lending strength. Their pigments mixed mineral oxides with tree sap that flexed as the stone expanded and contracted. These were technologies of patience designed to outlast dynasties. Our solutions, for all their precision, often feel like bandages on a wound we helped create. Speculative futures loom large in conservation debates. Some propose encasing the entire wall in a climate-controlled sarcophagus of glass, a solution that would preserve the stone but kill the living dialogue of light and shadow that gives the carvings depth. Others suggest letting nature take its course, arguing that erosion itself is part of the wall's story. The most radical idea comes from a collective of descendant artists. They're training neural networks on scans of the wall, teaching AI to predict how lost details might have appeared, not to recreate them physically, but to project holographic restorations that would overlay the decaying originals. It's a controversial vision history as augmented reality, where algorithms become the new scribes. Perhaps the wall's final lesson is about impermanence. The Lakshmi and Varuna artisans knew their work would change. They carved with an understanding that wind and water would soften edges, that generations would reinterpret their stories. But they couldn't have imagined a world where the very air conspired to erase them. As the climate crisis accelerates, we're forced to confront uncomfortable questions. What does it mean to preserve memory when the ground beneath it is shifting? Can digital backups ever capture the weight of stone, the warmth of sunlight on carved figures, the way shadows pool differently in drought years? The wall endures, but its longevity is no longer guaranteed, and in that uncertainty, it becomes something new, a mirror for our own fragile moment, racing to document what we might not be able to save. If these stones could speak, they'd tell you how it feels to stand silent while empires rise and fall against your surface. I've watched kings press their triumphs into my skin with chisels, only for their enemies to carve rebuttals between the lines. The weight of their stories has bent my spine over centuries, yet I refuse to buckle. There's a quiet arrogance in that, knowing you've outlasted every hand that ever touched you. I remember the droughts that cracked my mortar, the monsoons that turned my pigments to rivers, and the war that sent flames licking at my base while rival factions debated whether I was worth saving. They never realized I didn't need their protection. My strength was never in the gold they gilded me with or the prayers they whispered at my feet. It was in the tension, the way I held their competing truths like a bridge stretched between cliffs, trembling but unbroken. Generations of children have traced their fingers over my contradictions, wide-eyed at the idea that history could wear two faces. Their teachers hush them, pointing to the Lakshmi's gleaming processions as real history, dismissing the Varuna's rebellions as graffiti. But I feel the truth in their small hands, the way they linger on the rougher carvings, the ones that don't fit the official story. They understand instinctively what scholars overcomplicate. That memory isn't about choosing sides, but about holding space for the cracks where light gets in. Now you stand before me, camera raised, and I wonder what you see. Another ancient relic, a backdrop for your curated travel photos, or do you feel it, the hum of 8 centuries whispering through your shoes? You're part of the story now. Every flashbulb that steals my colors, every fingerprint that oils my surface, every algorithm that reduces me to a viral clip, they're new layers in the palimpsest. So here's my challenge to you. Don't just look. Press your palm against the spot where a Lakshmi priest's robe stitches into a Varuna battle standard. Feel the ridge where two histories fused instead of breaking. Then ask yourself, what truths are you carrying that might outlast you, and who gets to decide if they're worth remembering? Imagine running your fingers over the temple wall through your screen, not just seeing the carvings, but feeling their texture as your touch reveals layers invisible to the naked eye. A new virtual tool lets you do exactly that, digitally, scratching away centuries of grime to expose the ghost carvings beneath. Swipe left, and the Lakshmi's gold leaf temporarily restores itself, figures straightening from their weathered slouch. Swipe right, and the Varuna's faded battle cries flare back to life in electric blue. This isn't just preservation, it's time travel, letting you interrogate the stone like an archaeologist with a trowel and a hunch. The most striking feature, a dynamic overlay that animates the wall's competing narratives in real time. Tap a Lakshmi procession and watch as the figures pivot to reveal Varuna graffiti hidden in their shadows, a soldier's spear transforming into a rebel's flagpole mid-swing. The app's conflict view mode goes further, rendering the carvings as living panels where rival scenes physically jostle for space. Varuna warriors shoulder aside Lakshmi priests. A carved treaty tablet splits down the middle to show two contradictory translations. It's chaotic, mesmerizing, and eerily reflective of how history plays out in our own feeds, multiple truths battling for dominance in the same frame. Scholars are divided on this digital intervention. Some praise it for capturing the wall's essence as a living debate, not a static artifact. Others warn it risks gamifying complex history, reducing generations of tension to a swipeable, choose-your-side mechanic. But the developers counter that the tool's true power lies in its ambiguity mode, which highlights moments where the carvings themselves compromise. Zoom in on a contested border, and the app overlays thermal imaging showing where both artisans shared tools, their chisel marks blending into collaborative strokes. A seemingly chaotic tangle of vines resolves into an intentional pattern when viewed through polarization filters, proof that some sections were designed to harmonize, not clash. What emerges from this high-tech exploration are lessons that resonate far beyond ancient stone. The wall teaches us that historical truth often lives in the edits, the places where narratives were sanded down but not erased, where opposing claims were forced to share space. Modern conflicts over memorials and monuments echo this same tension. Do we sand away discomfort or let it stand as part of the record? The app's most poignant feature may be its erosion simulator, which forecasts how climate change will degrade specific carvings within decades. Watching the Varuna's rebellion scenes dissolve first due to their vulnerable pigments drives home a brutal irony that environmental loss could unintentionally silence one side of this centuries-old debate, repeating the very erasures the wall once resisted. Archaeologist Dr. Elena Ruiz, who consulted on the project, puts it best: this wall was never a single message, it was a conversation frozen in stone. Our tools now let us unfreeze it, not to settle the argument, but to hear both voices clearly for the first time. As you toggle between narratives on your screen, remember you're not just observing history. You're stepping into an 800-year-old negotiation about who gets to be remembered and how. The real magic happens in the split second when both versions flicker on-screen together. That fragile moment when the stone stops being a battleground and becomes a mirror. After decades of study, historians have reached some consensus about this temple wall, though even their firmest conclusions leave room for wonder. The most widely accepted theory paints the wall as a diplomatic masterpiece, carved during a fragile truce between the Lakshmi and Varuna dynasties. Forensic analysis of tool marks reveals artisans from both cultures worked simultaneously, their chisels literally passing in the night. This wasn't a case of one faction overwriting another, it was a deliberate, stone-bound treaty. Imagine rival scribes at the same table, etching competing claims onto shared parchment, each knowing future generations would judge their versions side by side. Yet mysteries persist like shadows between the carvings. Why did they choose this particular wall when other temple surfaces remained singular in their storytelling? Spectral imaging hints at an older, third narrative beneath the current carvings, faint outlines of a forgotten culture's symbols, almost entirely sanded away. Some scholars speculate this was sacred ground long before either dynasty rose, making it neutral territory. Others point to the wall's unique acoustics. When struck gently, it produces two distinct resonant tones, a phenomenon local legends describe as the gods arguing. The biggest unanswered question isn't how the wall was made, but why its contradictions survived intact. In an era where conquerors routinely erased predecessors' monuments, this mutual preservation is extraordinary. A recently deciphered merchant's ledger from 1203 mentions a stone pact between the dynasties, possibly brokered by copper miners whose tunnels ran beneath the temple. Their ore fueled both armies, giving them rare leverage to demand this artistic ceasefire. But the truth remains fragmented, like the wall itself. Historians' theories interlock without ever fully aligning. What's clear is that the wall defies simple categorization. It's neither propaganda nor pure history, but something far more human, a testament to the urge to be remembered, even by those who despised you. The carvings capture a moment when two cultures, exhausted by conflict, found an ingenious compromise. Rather than destroy each other's stories, they'd let them stand in perpetual debate. In doing so, they created something rarer than victory, a record that honors the complexity of truth itself. As you stand before these stones, whether physically or through the screen, consider what echoes of our own time might survive 8 centuries hence. Which of today's competing narratives will future generations see as fact, which as fiction, and which might they find miraculously preserved side by side, a silent testament to our own struggles with memory and power? The wall offers no easy answers, only an invitation to sit with discomfort, to question whose voices are amplified and whose are carved in the margins, and to recognize that history, like stone, is textured by every hand that touches it. Take a moment to think about the stories you were raised on, the heroes your textbooks praised, the family legends repeated at holidays, the versions of events you've always assumed were true. Now ask yourself whose hands shaped those narratives. The temple wall's greatest power isn't just revealing ancient biases, it holds up a mirror to our own. Look around and you'll find competing histories etched into everything from national holidays to childhood photo albums. That Founders' Day parade celebrating unity. There's likely another version where it's called Invasion Day by those who lost land. Your grandfather's war stories might glow with camaraderie, while the enemy's archives describe the same battles as massacres. The wall reminds us that memory is never passive, it's an act of curation, where every inclusion demands an exclusion. Try this, grab a notebook and jot down 3 facts you know about your country's history. Now imagine how someone from a rival nation, a marginalized community, or even the losing side of that story might retell those events. See where the gaps widen. Maybe your version emphasizes pioneers' bravery, while theirs highlights displacement. Perhaps your family lore paints an ancestor as a visionary, but court records show lawsuits from betrayed partners. These aren't flaws in history, they're proof it's alive, breathing differently through every set of lungs. The Lakshmi and Varuna artisans knew this intimately. Their carvings whisper that objectivity is a myth. What survives is always, inevitably, a perspective. Now consider the weight of that realization. When you stand before the temple wall, you're not just observing ancient conflicts, you're touching a nerve that still thrums today. That tightness in your chest when you spot a Varuna rebel's defiant grin inches below a Lakshmi king's benevolent smile. It's the same unease you feel when a childhood hero's statue is toppled, or when a documentary unpacks the dark side of a beloved invention. The wall doesn't just show us history's contradictions, it makes us feel them viscerally in the pit of our stomachs. There's a reason tourists often fall silent here. It's one thing to intellectually grasp that history is multifaceted, it's another to physically trace your fingers over proof that someone's truth was literally carved in stone, only to have their enemy's truth chiseled right beside it, equally permanent. The emotional impact isn't about ancient kings, it's about recognizing ourselves in their struggle. Every time we insist, this is how it happened, we're standing on one side of that wall, oblivious to the figures carved on the reverse. The stone's quiet challenge lingers long after you leave. What truths are you etching, and who's etching theirs just out of your sight? The temple wall doesn't just preserve history, it exposes something fundamental about how our minds work. Psychologists call it cognitive dissonance, the mental gymnastics we perform to hold two contradictory ideas at once. The Lakshmi carvings whisper prosperity and divine favor, while the Varuna rebellions scream oppression and resistance. Yet somehow the same brain can absorb both narratives without short-circuiting. Studies from Yale's Cognition and Development Lab show this isn't a bug in our wiring, it's a feature. When subjects were shown conflicting historical accounts side by side, fMRI scans revealed heightened activity in the anterior cingulate cortex, the brain's conflict resolution center. Rather than rejecting one version outright, most participants instinctively sought connections, however tenuous. The wall proves we've been doing this for centuries, squinting at opposing truths until they form a pattern we can live with. But here's the twist. Modern society has grown increasingly allergic to this kind of ambiguity. Ancient pilgrims could stand before the wall and accept that a king might be both a conqueror and a liberator, depending on who told the story. Today, algorithms feed us streamlined narratives, tailored to confirm what we already believe. A Stanford study tracking news consumption found that 78% of participants abandoned articles presenting competing perspectives within the first paragraph, labeling them confusing or biased. The wall's artisans expected viewers to hold tension. Our digital age treats contradiction like a glitch to be fixed. Artists have long grappled with this discomfort. Look at Picasso's Weeping Woman, her fractured face showing grief from multiple angles at once, a visual echo of the temple wall's layered truths. Or consider composer John Cage's 433, a piece that forces listeners to sit with the absence of expected music, much like the wall forces us to sit with unresolved history. Contemporary creators are taking it further. Digital artist Rafik Anadol projects AI-generated memories onto crumbling monuments, letting algorithms weave competing archival fragments into shimmering, ever-shifting narratives. Like the Lakshmi and Varuna carvers, these artists refuse to let us off the hook with simple answers. The wall's real genius lies in its refusal to resolve. It doesn't just tolerate cognitive dissonance, it weaponizes it. When you stand before those stones, your brain can't help but try reconciling the irreconcilable. That friction is where understanding grows. Modern science confirms what the ancients intuited. Discomfort isn't the enemy of truth, it's the proof you're getting close. The Varuna warrior's clenched fist and the Lakshmi priest's open palm aren't mistakes to be corrected. They're invitations to stretch beyond the limits of a single story, to live for a moment in the charged space between certainties. Perhaps that's why the wall feels so subversive today. In a world desperate for clean narratives, it offers something far more radical, the messy, magnificent truth that we contain multitudes. The same mind that worships heroes can also mourn their victims. The same heart that loves a country can critique its crimes. The Lakshmi and Varuna artisans didn't just carve stone, they carved a mirror, showing us how to hold contradictions without crumbling. 8 centuries later, their masterpiece still asks the hardest question: Can you bear the weight of more than one truth? For generations, the temple wall hasn't just been studied, it's been sung. A haunting folk melody from the region, passed down through oral tradition, captures its duality in a single refrain. Two truths grew from one stone / one for the king, one for the bone. The bone refers to local lore about rebels buried beneath the temple, their voices rising through the carvings. Listen closely to the song's structure, and you'll hear its own clever rebellion. The Lakshmi verses march in steady, royal rhythms, while the Varuna stanzas break into uneven, defiant cadences. Yet the chorus forces them to share the same melody, a musical echo of the wall's uneasy truce. Poets have wrestled with the wall's contradictions even more directly. A celebrated 20th century verse by Bengali writer Amal Dutta describes it as a quarrel frozen mid-breath, where every chisel stroke was both wound and suture. Contrast that with British colonial administrator Clive Farnsworth's dismissive 1892 sonnet, calling the carvings a savage palimpsest where history stutters in half-lit lies. The difference in tone reveals more about the poets than the wall itself, one embracing ambiguity, the other demanding singular authority. Even today, slam poets from Lakshmi and Varuna descendant communities battle in cafes using the wall as metaphor, their performances punctuated by the same tension their ancestors carved. Modern musicians take the clash further. Experimental composer Riaz Ali's Two Temples splits the orchestra into factions, strings playing Lakshmi hymns in harmonic scales, while brass instruments blast Varuna war chants in dissonant modes. The piece's climax lets them collide without resolution, leaving listeners as unsettled as the wall's first pilgrims. Pop culture isn't immune either. A viral Varuna hip-hop track samples the sound of chisels on stone, its lyrics taunting. "You built your truth up high / we wrote ours in the sky." The music video overlays augmented reality onto the temple, making carvings bleed pigment when touched, a provocative metaphor for history's unhealed wounds. What's fascinating isn't just how artists reinterpret the wall, but how they replicate its core tension in their mediums. Just as the original carvers used stone grain and pigment to sway perception, musicians manipulate rhythm and key, poets lean on meter and metaphor. A 2021 multimedia installation even projected rival verses onto the wall itself, their glow fading where the carvings already spoke loudest, letting the stone choose which words survived the light. This creative dialogue stretches far beyond local traditions. Listen to protest songs from Northern Ireland's Troubles or Cyprus's divided capital, and you'll hear the same refrain: one event, two anthems. These artistic echoes ripple into geopolitics. The wall's physical duality mirrors modern border conflicts where competing narratives are literally set in stone. Consider how Armenia and Azerbaijan design war memorials just miles apart, each claiming the same territory in carved insistence. Or how Korea's DMZ has become a canvas for dueling propaganda villages, their loudspeakers broadcasting rival histories across the barbed wire. The difference: those modern sites aim to drown out opposition, while our temple wall forces dialogue by proximity. Its silent lesson lingers. You don't have to agree with your enemy's story to let it share the air. Perhaps that's why the wall still breathes in art 8 centuries later. It's not just a relic, it's a mirror for every era's struggles over memory. When a Lakshmi descendant painter depicts the wall with gold leaf while her Varuna rival uses charcoal, they're not just honoring ancestors. They're proving the stone's true power, to make us see that history isn't a monolith, but a mosaic where every shard cuts differently depending on who holds it. The temple wall's silent dialogue of competing truths, finds eerie echoes in today's divided cities, places where concrete and steel slice through streets like modern chisels carving contested histories. Take Nicosia, Cyprus, where a buffer zone of barbed wire and sandbags has split the city since 1974. On the Greek Cypriot side, murals depict smiling children and olive branches. Cross to the Turkish Cypriot quarter, and the walls scream with graffiti of clenched fists and martyrs. Like our ancient temple, these partitions hold mirroring narratives, yet unlike the Lakshmi and Varuna carvers, no one here etched them side by side. The stories face away from each other, back to back, refusing to acknowledge they share the same ground. Berlin's ghostly traces whisper a similar tension. Fragments of the wall that once cleaved the city now stand as memorials, their surfaces layered with decades of paint, defiant slogans from the 80s overlapping tourist selfies from the 21st century. But peel back the layers and you'll find something startling. Sections where East German guard towers have been repurposed as art galleries, their brutalist frames now hung with canvases that critique the very regime they once enforced. It's a fleeting glimpse of what our temple wall achieved, not erasure, but transformation, where opposing forces occupy the same structure without cancelling each other out. Yet physical partitions rarely resolve narrative wars. Belfast's peace walls, erected during the Troubles, still loom between neighborhoods 30 years after the Good Friday Agreement. Tour guides point to their brightly painted murals as symbols of progress, but locals know the truth. These barriers have calcified division by letting each community cultivate its own mythology unchallenged. Unlike our temple wall, where rival carvings exist in taut dialogue, these modern dividers encourage parallel monologues, two solitudes shouting past each other. But hope flickers in unexpected places. Consider Mostar's starry Most Bridge, destroyed in the Bosnian War and painstakingly rebuilt. Its reconstructed stones now bear scars intentionally left. Visible bullet marks from the 90s sit beside 16th century Ottoman tool marks. The bridge doesn't hide its fractures, it makes them part of its strength. Local youth from once warring communities gather annually to dive from its heights, a tradition that predates the conflict and now stitches the city together anew. Here, finally, we see our temple wall's philosophy in action, not a silencing of discord, but a willingness to let wounds and wonders share the same surface. The lesson lingers like dust motes in cathedral light. Physical barriers might freeze conflict in place, but they can't stop stories from seeping through the cracks. The Lakshmi and Varuna artisans knew this instinctively, that stone could be both battleground and meeting ground. Their wall whispers to us across centuries. Divisions don't dissolve by insisting on a single truth, but by making space for the tremulous, terrifying moment when multiple truths touch. Not to merge, not to conquer, but simply to exist breathing the same air, warmed by the same sun. Walk through the village hugging the temple complex today, and you'll find something remarkable. The wall's contradictions haven't divided this community, they've become its heartbeat. For generations, locals have turned the Lakshmi and Varuna carvings into something neither dynasty could have imagined, a shared language. At the weekly market, vendors arrange their stalls in mirrored rows, spices from Lakshmi-descended farmers displayed beside Varuna clan textiles, their vibrant chaos echoing the wall's interplay of order and rebellion. We call it the bargaining dance, laughs 70-year-old tea seller Mina, whose family traces lineage to both dynasties. Customers argue over prices like our ancestors argued over history, except here, everyone leaves happy. The wall's duality even shapes local festivals. Every spring, children reenact the carvings in a play where no side wins. Lakshmi princes and Varuna rebels trade roles yearly, their costumes stitched from fabrics that blend both cultures' dyes. It started as a school project, explains teacher Arjun, but now elders say it's how we teach kids to hold complexity. During performances, audiences don't cheer for one faction over another. They applaud moments where the actors find unexpected harmony, a rebel handing a fallen king water, or a priest sheltering a wounded warrior. These aren't in the original carvings, but as Baker Priya puts it while shaping dough into commemorative cookies, the stone gave us the conversation. We get to keep it alive. What outsiders see as conflict, villagers have transformed into communal memory. The temple's caretakers, a rotating council of Lakshmi and Varuna, descendants deliberately sweep dust from both sets of carvings with equal care. When monsoons threaten pigment loss, they prioritize not by historical importance, but by which scenes local artisans reference most. That battle freeze. Says Potter Dev, pointing to a Varuna siege scene. My great-grandmother used its patterns in her ceramics, the Lakshmi's harvest dance that's in our wedding murals. Erase one and you erase part of our hands. The wall's resilience has become a metaphor for daily life. After a 2018 earthquake cracked its base, volunteers formed a human chain to pass buckets of mortar, descendants of rivals mixing cement like their ancestors once mingled pigments. Funny thing, notes Mason Rhea running her thumb over a repaired section. The new cracks followed the old chisel lines. Even when it breaks, it remembers both stories. Tourists often ask if the village ever debates correcting the wall, choosing one narrative. The answer comes in a proverb painted above the schoolhouse door. A tree with two trunks still shares one root. As sunset stains the carvings gold and blue, elders gather at the wall's base for a ritual older than memory. They don't pray to Lakshmi or Varuna alone, but to the space between the narrow bands of uncarved stone where light pools deepest. That's where the future lives, says Grandmother Lotta, her palms pressed to warm rock. Not in their victories or ours, but in what grows from holding both. It's this quiet wisdom that lingers as you leave, the sense that 8 centuries of dissonance have composted into something richer, not a single truth, but fertile ground where new stories take root. The most astonishing truth about this temple wall isn't that it preserves 2 rival histories, it's that those histories, in their fierce opposition, became each other's unlikely guardians. Think about it, the Lakshmi artisans could have scraped away every Varuna rebellion scene, or the Varuna conquerors might have shattered the Lakshmi's golden processions. But they didn't, not out of mercy but necessity. The carvings are so densely intertwined that destroying one would have collapsed the other. A chisel aimed at a Varuna warrior's spear would have sheared off the Lakshmi priest's hand resting beside it. Pigments layered so carefully that sanding away the blues would take the gold beneath. Their rivalry forged an accidental pact. To erase your enemy's story, you'd have to obliterate your own. This interdependence whispers a paradox about how opposition works. The Lakshmi and Varuna dynasties saw themselves as sworn adversaries, yet their legacies became chemically fused like 2 trees grafted at the root. Modern conservators discovered this the hard way when attempting to clean a Varuna battle scene. The solvent that lifted their indigo dye also began dissolving the Lakshmi's crimson underlayer. Even time itself treated them as a single entity. The same lichens that slowly ate at Varuna inscriptions also crept onto Lakshmi reliefs, binding their fates in decay. The wall became a reluctant testament to entanglement, proof that the louder you insist on your own truth, the more inextricably it becomes tied to the truths you deny. There's a brutal poetry to how this plays out in the carvings themselves. A Varuna rebel's upraised sword, carved in shallow relief, only appears to gleam because it catches light bouncing off a Lakshmi priest's gilded robe. The Lakshmi's eternal prosperity scenes derive their depth from the shadow cast by Varuna's chaotic battle grooves. Neither narrative stands alone. They need each other's contrasts to feel complete. It's as if the stone itself conspired to humble human arrogance. Your triumph only looks radiant because your enemy's defiance throws it into relief. This irony resonates far beyond ancient temples. Consider how rival tech companies' patent wars inadvertently accelerated innovation, each forced to build on the other's breakthroughs, or how feuding artists like Picasso and Matisse pushed each other to greater heights by stealing and subverting each other's techniques. Even in nature, predator and prey evolve in lockstep. Wolves grow swifter, deer grow wilier, and the forest thrives because neither can annihilate the other without destroying the balance that sustains them. The wall's carvers didn't realize they were enacting a universal principle. Opposition doesn't just create conflict, it creates cohesion. What does this mean for us? The wall challenges our instinct to simplify history into heroes and villains, winners and losers. Its very existence proves that the most enduring legacies aren't pure victories, but uneasy equilibriums, what historian Thomas Berry called the great conversation between competing forces. When we encounter polarizing narratives today, whether in politics or personal relationships, the wall whispers a counterintuitive truth. Sometimes the surest way to preserve your story is to leave room for the one you least want to hear. Not because you agree, but because their voice, however grating, is the whetstone that keeps yours sharp. The Lakshmi and Varuna artisans thought they were carving their dominance into eternity. Instead, they immortalized something far more profound, the humbling recognition that no narrative stands alone, and that even the fiercest rivals might, in the end, be holding each other up. Standing before this temple wall, we're left with a humbling truth. History refuses to fit into neat boxes of heroes and villains, victors and vanquished. The Lakshmi and Varuna carvings mock our craving for simple stories, insisting instead that the past is a prism. Turn it slightly, and new facets catch the light. This isn't just about ancient kings, it's about us. Every time we reduce conflicts to tweets or slogans, every time we demand history conform to our comfort, we're chiseling away at the very complexity that makes truth worth preserving. Consider how we memorialize our own era. City squares worldwide are cluttered with statues that freeze messy lives into bronze certainties, while contentious chapters get sanded from textbooks. Social media algorithms feed us streamlined narratives, rewarding outrage over nuance. The wall whispers a radical alternative. What if we built monuments that honored doubt, that showcased not just the roar of triumph, but the murmurs of dissent clinging to its edges? Imagine a museum where Confederate and Union soldiers shared the same plaque, their letters woven into a single, dissonant tapestry, or a classroom where children debated both Israeli and Palestinian poets side by side, not to pick a side, but to feel the weight of coexistence. The wall's real power lies in its quiet rebellion against erasure. It dares us to ask, whose voices are we muffling in our own lives? When we dismiss a co-worker's critique as whining, or reduce political opponents to caricatures, we're playing the same game the Lakshmi and Varuna dynasties could have but didn't. They carved their contradictions into eternity, leaving us a gift far more valuable than any singular truth: the courage to stand in the storm of multiple perspectives and say, I can hold this tension. As the sun dips behind the temple, painting the carvings in fleeting gold, picture this scene from a drone's view, the wall now just a dark scribble against the earth, its stories still humming. Now zoom further out beyond the ruins to the glowing grids of our modern cities. What walls will future archaeologists puzzle over there? the concrete barriers dividing neighborhoods by wealth, the polarized comment sections fossilized in server farms. Or perhaps, if we've learned anything, they'll find rare places where we etched our clashes side by side, refusing to let any single story claim the stone. The choice isn't just how we remember the past, it's what we're willing to carve into the future. So where do you stand when faced with the temple walls' dueling histories? Does the Lakshmi's vision of prosperous order speak to you, or does the Varuna's fiery defiance stir something deeper? Drop a comment below telling us which side of this ancient debate resonates with you, or better yet, share examples of contested histories from your own region. Every town has its own version of this wall, whether it's a disputed monument, a renamed street, or a family story that changes depending on who's telling it. Your perspective adds another layer to this 800-year conversation. If you've been captivated by this journey through stone and memory, don't let it end here. Smash that like button to help others discover these hidden dialogues of history. Subscribe to keep unraveling the world's most fascinating mysteries, and ring the bell so you won't miss our next adventure. Speaking of which, imagine a library where every book you pull from the shelf directly contradicts the one before it. A place where histories aren't just debated, but deliberately designed to cancel each other out. That's exactly where we're going next, to explore the labyrinth of a lost archive that might just hold the most dangerous idea of all. What if every version of the past is simultaneously true and false? Until then, keep questioning the stories etched around you. Sometimes the most profound truths live in the cracks between